Digimon, digitiert zu Tentomon.
Tentomon, digitiert zu Kabuterimon. Kabuterimon, Ultradigitation zu Mega Kabuterimon. Spürst du die Kraft in dir? Öfters geben als uns sei. 生きるから歩き続けよう。君にしかできないことがある。青い星に光が守れ愛する人たくましい自分になれるさ壊せ弱気な君を崩せぶつかる壁を熱いこと武器になるから Believe in your heart
greet you again for my personal assessment about the 6th figure release of this figure series 06 Chou-Shinka-Tamashii-Series Tentomon
Atlur Kabuterimon
or Digivolving-Spirits-Series 06 Tentomon
Mega Kabuterimon.
Yeah! Since Chou-Shinka-Tamashii is the original Japanese name, I will continue to use it more often than our name, and that also applies to the Japanese name for Mega Kabuterimon, which is called Atlur Kabuterimon in Japan. Also here again, while judging this figure, I will going back to official statements and my personal pre-justice assumptions and statements that I made about in my update videos, which I made to every new announcement about this Chou-Shinka-Tamashii-Series promotion page. Bandai, Tamashii Nations and the creators say themselves officially that with this figure series they strive to be the ultimate transformable Digimon figure series for adult collectors. And because of this official statement I will be very strict in my judgment here again. Then let's get started. However, these statements are not so important here either, because here, let me say, you have only halfway an old comparable transformable figure in order to be able to judge the possible improvements by comparing the old to the new figure. Anyway, from that point of view. No! Here we are entering uncharted territory for the 4th time, as Bandai Tamashii themselves with this figure halfway did, with the implementation and conception with the 6th figure, because there has never been a transformable figure of these two characters before, at least only halfway. Because you will surely know that the old figure evolved from the Kabuterimon form to Atlur Kabuterimon's form or Mega Kabuterimon's form. Chou-Shinka-Tamashii-Series 06 Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon was released on September the 15th, 2018 in Japan. I also ordered Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon from Nippon Yasen, again using the Transy logistic shipping service for Europe. Because of course, this figure was also sold there at a cheaper price than it was sold in my German online shops or elsewhere. It was also the first figure that was announced with a lower suggested retail price again by Bandai than Diablomon and Alphamon, and the officially suggested retail price was around $76 US, and so it was identical to that of Gabumon, Metalgarurumon back then. This pre-ordered figure was then delivered to my home relatively quickly. And now it was finally time again, and I held the long-awaited 6th figure in my own hands, and all thoughts that I have and had since the first pictures and since the official update up to now, I will now include in this assessment once again. What surprised me a little was Bandai's suggested retail price, which was much lower than that for Diablomon and Alphamon, but of course I had already rated this in my update video as very positive and relatively cheap compared to the high price they suggested for Alphamon. I would have expected significantly more for Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon as well. In contrast, since the transformation system of this new figure looked from the pictures in the update somehow more complex than that of Doraemon Alphamon, and I therefore said and thought that in terms of engineering much more thoughts would have flowed into the development of the figure, and mentioned that it must have been more difficult to create Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon. Because I already said in the update that both Evo forms looking breathtakingly good are very detailed, accurate, proportioned, and they didn't have an old figure version in this form as a direct template. I also said in Tentomon's Atlur Kabuterimon's update video on the subject, which in contrast Doraemon Alphamon is just a shell former, which, to be honest, only has to stand up from a sitting position, and Doraemon's parts are folded away to mainly form the cape. However, I have to admit that these statements from me was very wrong and rather inaccurate, because these statements simply did not correspond to the truth. For Doraemon Alphamon, and I would like to clarify this again, and it is like I had described it in detail in my last review video about Doraemon Alphamon. Because in comparison, this transformation system of Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon is actually not as complex and rather easier than it seemed in those pictures back then, and also simpler and not as complex as that of Doraemon Alphamon, which figure in the end actually turned out to be much more complex in its transformation system than it looked from this image. When you have now the figures so directly in front of you for comparison. That in my defense and for clarification, you should be really careful with such predictions. However, in terms of the price difference, I stick to the fact that I was surprised that Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon was much cheaper in contrast to Doraemon Alphamon, because as I explained it in detail in Doraemon's Alphamon's review video, Alphamon's forms parts, they could create it on the base of the injection molds from Figuarts Alphamon figure, and in contrast to Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon, they had to start from zero. So much for that, and I would also like to come to the actual assessment of the figure, and first I will explain everything about the rookie form should mean I start with Tentomon. The figure in Tentomon's form in the natural posture for him is about a bit over 4 inches, and that would be about over 10.2 centimeters, measured from the feet to the upper band of his antennas. Of course, depends the posture you give him. It depends on the posture you give him. And that also applies to the length, and this is about circa nearly 4 and 9 inches, and that would be about 12.5 centimeters in this posture, measured from the tips of his forelimbs to the end of the abdomen. Here it is very clear for the first time that they did not have to sacrifice the look of the pre-evolution form for the better look of the further evolution form for this figure, because as it was already evident from the first pictures which got posted, which came from a Tamashii event in 2017, where Tentomon's colored prototype was shown for the first time. The Tentomon form is also very accurate implemented to the original character design and looks incredibly good and accurately proportioned. As I told you back then with my first reaction about this more than successful Tentomon form in one of my update videos. And I also said that it is hard to believe that this would be a transformable figure, and was especially excited as well to see what the figure in Atlur Kabuterimon form would look like, because they hadn't presented this to us back then only in this form of the super early prototype, which, as I reported at that time, was also shown in a live stream at the same event, which was special of the figures shown so far, that they showed us Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon figure for the first time, first in its rookie form. They were probably so convinced of their own work that they dared to show the figure in its rookie form for the first time, this time. And he was by the first looks and is really fantastic in this form, and that was the reaction of many people when they seen Tentomon's Evo form for the first time. because Tentomon's form could be implemented so incredibly well and almost perfectly to his original character design, as due to the transformation ability, Bandai Tamashii did not succeeded this on any of their previously released figures in their lower evolution form, and on top of it, Tentomon is almost free of kibble parts of Atlur Kabuterimon's form. However, I had expressed my fear in the same update video that so much perfect looking Tentomon could mean possibly also a lot of perfect looking Tentomon kibble parts on Atlur Kabuterimon's form. Luckily I was wrong, but more about that later on. Was it at that time also still incomprehensible to me why they did not consider a remake of the old Kabuterimon to Atlur Kabuterimon or Mega Kabuterimon figure for the new Chou-Shinka-Tamashii figure. And it was also very unclear to me how they managed to hide all of the very large and long body parts of Atlur Kabuterimon's form in such a way that Tentomon's form still has no visible Atlur Kabuterimon kibble parts on the outsides. What an incredibly good engineering master's performance Bandai Tamashii did there. Yes, something like that. I described this in Alphamon's update video, where I also presented the first reaction about Atlur Kabuterimon's form because of this then suddenly and unexpected posted picture. But more on that later. But because of this picture I also had rated this figure, and as far as you could judge this at that time, as the most successful and best designed figure of those previously shown and partially released figures of this line. And I haven't changed my mind for now. First for Tentomon's form, because you can see for yourself how unusually perfect the figure in the rookie form looks compared to the other figures in their respective pre-evolution forms, and how breathtakingly great he got implemented in this form, and despite the transforming ability, how cute Tentomon is and how accurate the proportions of the individual body parts are in relation to each other, at least for those sections for which this applies. But hey, it is a transformable figure. And you can see here for the first time in Tentomon's perfection how positive it was to go the wrong way of evolution for this figure, and you can now better understand this concept, which has been criticized ahead by a lot of people, but more about that later on too. The various important and typical features of Tentomon were very well taken into account according to his original character design, insofar as this was possible due to the transforming ability and with the mold of all body parts, and got worked out very well. And for those parts for which it was able to do, those were also colored in detail with the accurate colors and color tones, or got molded from the correctly colored plastics. Because here too, most of the molding colors of the plastic were used for the overall colors, but nevertheless accurate and suitable colors were chosen for the different parts of the body. The main focus is on the implementation of his eyes here, which Bandai Tamashii also highlighted in their official update for Tentomon's form about materials. According to this, they wrote something like this: that in addition to these compound eye-like molded parts, they made translucent cover parts for the eyes to make the whole thing seem and look even better. That they molded the eyes so that they look really insect-like, and therefore that they are really looking like typical compound eyes of insects. Through this, I think this is really great and super fitting, even if that is not so obvious on the original character design. Is this idea to implement the eyes in this way for the figure here just world class, because it just has something, I think. And as we were promised in the official update back then, so this insect similarity was clearly reproduced for Tentomon's eyes. This great green color which they have chosen for the eyes suits perfectly well, and these additional cover parts made of translucent plastic make looking the eyes really beautiful compared to the overall mainly matte color design of Tentomon, and so the eyes standing out from the mainly matte color design which just achieves a great effect and made Tentomon look very lively, despite the fact that its original character design always seemed more mechanical to me. That is even less the case with the figure, also due to this great design and implementation of his eyes. Tentomon's form cannot only score with this general great look and design, but also shine with a good posability, and with that we would have reached the point articulation of Tentomon's form. The head is very poseable, though you might not think that at the first look, but it is true. The head is connected to the body with a molded on ball pack, so movements with the head in all directions are possible on this ball until different parts of the body getting in the way again. The balls are molded on the antenna's bases, which allows you to turn the antennas 360 degrees in the recess, so you can also adjust them as you like, and that's very good, whereby this complete turning ability is more due to the transformation. The front limbs are connected to a hinged pack. On this, up and down movements with the complete structure are possible, but I personally think that it looks best if you push the complete structure or this hinged pack up as far as possible, because only in this way you achieve with the upper part of the forelimbs or shoulder section a perfect looking finish and closed look to the upper body section. Furthermore, the front limbs can of course be moved in all directions on this ball until parts getting in the way again. The front section of the limbs are connected in the middle section with the upper section with a ball hinge. This means that the lower section can be bended outwards and inwards on this joint. Rotates 360 degrees at the connection, and the ball hinge joint itself can be additionally rotated 360 degrees even above. The rear limbs are attached to a ball pack, sitting as you can see additional in such a half-cutted open ball joint, so you can move them there in almost all directions until parts getting in the way again. The middle section of the hind limbs can be rotated 360 degrees on the connection on this half-cutted open ball joint. The lower section of the hind limbs is then connected to the middle section with such a ball hinge joint again, and can be rotated 360 degrees there again, as well as it can be rotated 360 degrees in the lower section on this joint again. Each of the middle limb is attached to the base on a ball pack. The middle section is equipped with a double hinge joint, which also makes it move-able and extend-able to the front, but it should rather stay more in this one position, because this part anyway is too big and too long, and is actually only Atlur Kabuterimon's form's folded second arm, and achieves in this position the best possible look and serving the purpose of forming Tentomon's typical third middle limb at least halfway. In any case, I personally find this one position best for that. Therefore, it makes no sense to turn the lower part of this middle limb. Otherwise, the components and features of Atlur Kabuterimon's Evo form will appear, which also refers to the incorrect coloring of these double colored different components for both evolution forms. In theory, however, it is possible because this lower area is also connected to the upper section with a molded on ball pack, but is also more for the transposability of Atlur Kabuterimon's form of the lower arm pair, and that it can be adjusted for both evolution forms so that it looks good and as accurate as it is possible for both Evo forms. In the official update, it was also highlighted that the elytra of Tentomon's form are also movable thanks to these obvious visible hinge joints. They can be opened quite wide, and it is possible to recreate impressive flight poses with the figure. What I would call, due to the perfection of Tentomon's form, another remarkable gimmick that they also included, and that was another surprise in this official update besides the perfect proportions of Tentomon's form. They also look good from all angles, as it was officially highlighted by Bandai Tamashii for Tentomon's form, and you can really only agree, as I already did in my update video. Here, Bandai Tamashii really pulled out all the stops to get everything out of the figure which was possible, and I am still talking just about Tentomon's Evo form first. But this little cute bug just looks and is so amazing, isn't it? I think because of this all, you can really ignore the few things and characteristics could not be implemented so accurately due to the ability to transform. I still would like to mention them. On the one hand, the black dots, which in the original character design or on the original character design are more pointy and not so flat and more cone-shaped, protrude higher in the air, which have to be more flat like this due to the transforming ability on the figure because of Atlur Kabuterimon, and due to the lack of space for Atlur Kabuterimon's form. They cannot has this accurate nature, shape and size, which I would again see as a very acceptable compromise. This makes them look more like real ladybug dots on Tentomon's form, but at least they hinted the right shape, because as you can see the black dots are still not completely flat and slightly conical shape towards the center or the top, which in turn gives the whole a very positive plus. Yes, and then we would have these middle arms, which as I said are too long and has halfways the wrong coloring and features for Tentomon's form, because they are twice detailed and colored so that they can be represented well for both forms, and because that those are actually the folded second lower arm pair of Atlur Kabuterimon's form. They made the best possible out of it, but I would see that again as an acceptable compromise for both Evo forms. Well, they perhaps could have designed them to be insert-able for Tentomon's form, though they could then have been a bit shorter and more decent for Tentomon, but then the accurate proportions and size would have been lost for Atlur Kabuterimon's lower second arm pair, maybe? That is really difficult to judge, and this fact should also be considered. Yes, and Tentomon's big gap between the head and body section from the side view, which was not able to be filled out more due to the ability to transform and the nature of the mold, but I think you can also live with it because it only looks so extreme from certain perspectives. Let's getting down to the transformation or digivolution. Tentomon can be digivolved into his very dangerous looking ultimate or respectively perfect form into Mega Kabuterimon or Atlur Kabuterimon in roughly 15 transformation steps, according to the instructions. The figure skips the one evolution stage of Kabuterimon and does directly an Ultra Digivolve or Chou-Shinka from Tentomon to Mega Kabuterimon or Atlur Kabuterimon. goes therefore as the first figure of the series the wrong way of evolution, but this concept works and pays off in full for this figure in the almost absolute perfection and the correct proportions, and this in the all-around view of both evolution forms. What is for the first time and therefore unique of the figures in the series which have been released up to this point. As I said, I made the first reaction about Atlur Kabuterimon's form in Alphamon's update video because of the suddenly posted picture, and despite the fact that this was very blurred, you could clearly see and guess how cool and perfect this figure is in Atlur Kabuterimon's form, and then will look in a high definition image. And here too, the quality of the instruction sheet itself has become even more valuable, even less more valuable once again, because Valkyramon, Diabolomon and Tentomon and Jewomon images in the instructions were only monochrome and the transformation steps are only highlighted in a different color. We have now, as you can see, the same pictures, and I meant for Alphamon they were more quality because of those colored pictures, which reflecting Doraemon Alphamon's real colors of both forms of the figure in picture form. I made something wrong here, but I think you understand what I mean. They got less more valuable for Tentomon, Atlur Kabuterimon again, in this regard and in compare. So yeah, ahead I was afraid that because Tentomon's form looks this perfect and because they showed the figure unusually first in Tentomon's form this time and Atlur Kabuterimon's form they didn't show us at all, it could be possible that this time Atlur Kabuterimon's form's look could have been sacrificed for the better look for Tentomon's form, and a lot of kibble parts from the perfect Tentomon could be maybe visible on Atlur Kabuterimon's form. Fortunately, this fear was quickly blown away with this blurred picture, because the picture already spoke for itself and I was just speechless, happy that my fear was completely wrong and unjustified. This made the official update clear with the absolutely awesome matching stage background image where you could see the figure in both forms for the first time in better quality, and that really did took away all my fears with any doubts. But it was just unusual that both Evo forms would look so perfect and accurate, and I let my total enthusiasm about loose on you and these about updates. Excuse me please. Another fear of mine from the beginning on, since they showed us this perfect Tentomon, was that these black dots could not be hidden for the accurate rear view of Atlur Kabuterimon's form's carapace, and could therefore also remain for Atlur Kabuterimon's form there, because Bandai Tamashii had made it very easy for the rear views of the figures which they released so far, since we know about Wargreymmon's Brave Shield. Therefore, I very much hope that the black dots can be rotated for both Evo forms. In this blurred first picture of Atlur Kabuterimon's form, it looked from the photo angle that they would actually be rotatable, since nothing black from the side of his carapace was not disabled, because it looked rotatable somehow. Because of this I became pretty sure, and my hope for the first time grew, that they can be rotated. The official update finally made it clear with these typical transformation images that the black dots for Atlur Kabuterimon's form were actually designed to be rotatable, which gave the figure, which was perfectly proportioned anyway, a further positive aspect in both forms, and I was very relieved because that this also destroyed my second big fear, which of course contributes to the perfect rear view of Atlur Kabuterimon's form and is absolutely great, but it was also a must at the same time, otherwise it would have been very weak again. The transformation system is actually very simple and at the same time ingenious, and as I said, looked more complex from this picture than it actually is. That's why the transformation is pretty easy. In short, the figure is half Tentomon and the other half is Atlur Kabuterimon, similar to the old figure where one half represented Kabuterimon and the other half Atlur Kabuterimon. And then by the new, for the most part, all of the parts for the respective not currently presented Evo form are folded together and hidden under this carapace by rotating it. The new one does not do much different in the base than the old figure, and therefore the transformation system is actually the same as by the old figure, of course only halfway with Tentomon's parts instead of Kabuterimon's. The only thing I would call actually transforming here is folding down Tentomon's head, turning the carapace around, including turning the black dots, and then turning the lower end of the middle limb around to reveal the correct details and coloring from the front for the respective Evo form just displayed. And then again folding up the head of Atlur Kabuterimon and its final position of its details. Otherwise, all other body parts and details of Atlur Kabuterimon's form are, as you can see, just folded onto his body to form a kind of lump, so that it fits, and the carapace for Tentomon's form can then cover everything up again. As you can see, the folded half of Atlur Kabuterimon's form's components, everything looks a bit wild and desolate here, and just so that it only serves the purpose and that everything fits under the carapace. But with this fairly simple and at the same time ingenious system, it does it very well then too. It should be noted here that the quality of the instructions themselves in comparison to Alphamon's instructions is sadly less quality again, and that point I mentioned. So I going on. But I think those colored pictures was probably also an exception to reflect Alphamon's higher position as a Royal Knight member. If the Ultimate Digivolve or Chou-Shinka from Tentomon to Atlur Kabuterimon is completed, you get, as it was already evident from the images from the update, a very perfect looking and very well proportioned Atlur Kabuterimon or Mega Kabuterimon with sharp edged figure arts, typical shaped and molded details that just look and are more than impressive. And also in this evolution form, just as it is in Tentomon's form, the figure knows how to impress. Even in this form, the amount of molded details is just impressive and as you would wish, and all important and typical details of Atlur Kabuterimon have been taken into account, and it is perfect to its original character design that it seems almost unbelievable, and in this form it looks more like a full figure arts figure than a transformable figure that unfolds from a perfectly proportioned Tentomon. That's just awesome and breathtaking. And as I said for the first time in this official update, as I said in my update video, and just now when you have the figure in front of you, you can see how positive the concept of the chosen wrong way of evolution is working for this figure, and how this can affect the look of both Evo forms so positively, as if in contrast a remake of the old Kabuterimon Atlur Kabuterimon figure had been considered, but more on that later. Atlur Kabuterimon's form, by the way, is almost about circa 6.4 inches, which would be about 6.5 centimeters, so in this for him natural and typical standing pose measured from the feet to the tip of his horn. Of course, it depends on the pose which you give him, then the size of course varies. Bandai Tamashii themselves wrote in their official promotion update about the Digivolving that this figure was redesigned and designed as a new range of designs that was not released in the old series at that time. You have to say that this is only partially true, and you all know the reason why. They also wrote that a body color change of the pre-evolution and further evolution from Tentomon to Atlur Kabuterimon was reproduced as good as it was possible by the perfect transformation technique through the conversion of parts or exchange of parts, and due to the evo from Tentomon to Atlur Kabuterimon form. Atlur Kabuterimon's form is a surprising figure that reproduced the perfect ratio of proportions viewed from every angle, and I had already agreed to these statements in my update video because they simply nailed it with that, at least as far as the part with the proportions goes. With this statement, they have justified themselves again for going the wrong way of evolution for this figure. And as I said, it's completely okay, because I think the end result is really nothing to sneeze at, this time even in both Evo forms. So for this figure, for these two characters, this concept works. As for the first part of the statement with the body color change, which could of course perfectly implemented here because of choosing the wrong way of evolution, because the main color of both characters is red and therefore also the red remains for both. So they had an advantage at the same time in choosing the wrong way of evolution, as if they had in contrary to go from Kabuterimon's blue to Atlur Kabuterimon's red again, as on the old figure. It remains to be seen whether you can describe this as a particularly successful body color change to the extent as it is with Doraemon, Alphamon and others, or simply see it just the way that they just taken the advantage of the wrong way of evolution concept remains an open question, and you can see how you want. But fact is that taking use of the advantage that red can remain here helps absolutely, so the figure in both forms and from every angle can look good and accurate to the original character design, and that is to be highlighted again in both Evo forms and even from the rear view. For most part, I would see the body color change in turning the black dots and turning the lower part of the middle arms around to reveal the right features for the respective evolution form. The best result of taking advantage of the wrong way of evolution concept can be seen in the non-existent kibble parts on the outer sections and the perfect proportions of all body sections of the figure in both forms. I mean, you see some kibble parts of the respective other form in the sections of the respective Evo form where you can look inside, but you can't see almost nothing on the outer sections. Everything else is very well folded, more in the rear section of the carapace, and gets hidden and covered by it in both forms. I find that what is so visible on the sides, on the inner edges of the carapace of the respective other Evo form also passes through as inner body components of insects. Noteworthy in Atlur Kabuterimon's form would only be the slightly more sticking out upper parts of Tentomon's front limbs, which is still absolutely acceptable, but I would include it in the upper point as well as in Tentomon's form the two long middle limbs. I've mentioned the reason for this several times before. And hey, it is still also a transformable figure, and if you ignore these little things by now, and which I mentioned, the kibble parts are hardly or not at all recognizable on the figure in both forms, which is simply incredibly impressive, and this applies even from behind. Because this is also absolutely remarkable, because this is the first time with this figure and is simply not the case with the other figures of the series which got released so far, and this Atlur Kabuterimon has its own status, and that in both Evo forms, which gives the figure a not countable number of positive plus points in both forms. Sadly, in my pictures for the evolution scene, you can see some additional kibble sticking out of Atlur Kabuterimon's lower body sections, which he actually does not to have and officially does not have. I would like to emphasize this here, and only comes from the fact that I unfortunately and stupidly not turned Tentomon antennas around during the transformation before. If I would have done that, the tips of the antennas down there would not be visible because they are actually turned around, and therefore to be positioned in the inner upper section of the carapace, and so getting perfectly covered by it if I had only done it correctly and as it is officially intended and designed to do. This is also very embarrassing for me, but unfortunately I couldn't change it for the pictures anymore. Luckily, you can see it only in a few pictures. However, I did it correctly for the demonstration of the transformation, and I also noticed this failure during doing that. Sorry guys for this incompetence, no offense. Due to the nature of non-existent kibble parts on the outer body sections and the perfect proportions in the all-around view, Diablomon's form clearly loses its status to Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon in both forms now as the best figure to date. Diablomon's form in relation to hardly existing kibble parts from Karamon's form and an almost flawless all-around view, also in connection with my little folding trick. That is clearly obvious now, but at least he could hold the status as a third, rather unexpected figure until the 6th release. But let's continue with Atlur Kabuterimon. Even the various typical features of Atlur Kabuterimon were molded out and molded down to the smallest detail and true to the original and his character design. Also the Digi-evolution in the parts, which Bandai Tamashii mentioned several times in some updates, you can notice on Atlur Kabuterimon if you compare it with the old figure in Atlur Kabuterimon's form. Particularly noticeable are the characteristic large muscles things on the upper arm pair, which now have the accurate shape, size and proportions to the rest of the upper body parts on the new figure, and of course this also applies to the size, nature and length of his horn. In comparison, the muscles of the old figure do not look so accurate sized molded, of course, and the size and length of the horn is much too small and too short on the old figure due to the transformation to Kabuterimon as a compromise. In general, the entire head shape looks much better on the new one, and everything is sharper and got molded in a way as you would wish. The right size, length and proportions of the rest also apply to the two arm pairs, which looks all so accurate sized on the new, which are also a bit too small and too thin compared to the huge rest of the body on the old figure. Again, the length of the lower arm pair, which is too large for Tentomon's shape form for his middle limbs, clearly has a positive effect for the overall image for Atlur Kabuterimon's form. In short, the new figure got molded and very well proportioned, touches in this regard a figure arts figure, and from almost every angle that we now got from Bandai Tamashii in this line, which facts are simply more than great. The only thing that does not look so good for Atlur Kabuterimon's form is the in general too round shaped carapace, which is only very noticeable when viewed directly from behind. Of course, it comes from the fact that Tentomon has such a round carapace, and you could see this again as an acceptable compromise. So Tentomon's form can have such a well-rounded carapace, and therefore it can looking so perfect. You might think that it sacrificed the better shape of the carapace in favor of Tentomon's form, instead doing this for Atlur Kabuterimon's form. However, what very positive is that a slightly slimmer, tapered, more accurate shape is hinted with the mold, with these incisions on the lower sections of the carapace, so that it is possible to distract from the somewhat too round shaped mold of the carapace for Atlur Kabuterimon's form, which is also great at the same time. You could of course have the opinion that a more accurate shape of the carapace they should rather sacrifice for Tentomon's form for the better look for Atlur Kabuterimon's form's carapace, like it was otherwise the case with the other figures, but I'm honestly not sure if all of this still would have worked so well transformation related. Firstly, that all parts of Atlur Kabuterimon's form could have been hidden so well under a more slim, not so round shaped carapace for Tentomon's form, and secondly, if such a not so round shaped carapace would have made Tentomon's form look so characteristically good. It's really difficult to judge it, and I actually have my doubts about it. I am not sure. In my update video I also said that Atlur Kabuterimon's middle foot piece is not accurate and too short due to the transforming ability. However, this statement from me was totally wrong, because the feet look exactly the same way on the original character design as they also designed it on the figure. That is why I taking back everything what I said about in this regard. I just didn't have that in my mind, and therefore I had criticized it as a small weak point on the new one, which is absolutely not the case. This is also due to the fact that I took the old figure for comparison, on which all foot pieces or toes have the same length, but this is because that by the old figure the feet of Kabuterimon's form serve also as feet for both Evo forms, and therefore have only for Kabuterimon's form the accurate looking feet. Of course, the new figure in Atlur Kabuterimon's form can also score well in its paint job, because all these molded details got also the perfect matching paint apps and color tones, whereby for the most part the molding colors of the plastic and the die-cast parts were used for the overall coloring, like I explained it about Tentomon's form. But this does not abort in the coloring style in any way, and everything got colored and designed very well, and as you would wish it to be. Because that they used for the most part for the different body parts of this figure in both forms matte colored plastic is also suitable for Atlur Kabuterimon's form and looks really good, because especially Atlur Kabuterimon has no direct parts that could be seen as armor, and he is more like a giant beetle. And that's why, in contrast to Alphamon, I find this mainly rather matte color design also fully suitable for him, also in terms of his original character design, and the way in which they designed this type of crystal, which is typical for Atlur Kabuterimon's carapace, just looks world class. Because this crystal shimmers beautifully and brings variety to the, in general, overall matte color design, similar to what it is with Tentomon eyes. I also find the color tones and the chosen darker red, almost red-brown, more suitable and accurate to the anime colors than the brighter red color design of the old figure in Atlur Kabuterimon's form. Tentomon's color, on the other hand, might have to be a little more brighter red, but this is also a compromise for both Evo forms. And besides, they even hinted the more brighter red color style for Tentomon on some body parts. The best way to see this is on the brighter red colored front and hind limbs of Tentomon. And the quality of the color scheme in general corresponds to the level of the figure arts figures. Now we come to the articulation of Atlur Kabuterimon's form. Unfortunately, the head is not pose-able, but it is still possible to let Atlur Kabuterimon look up and down a bit by using the transformation joints. But only very slightly. If you move too much here, the transformation joints move and come out of the intended position and therefore no longer form the intended closing to the upper body and components. All the components are also shifted from the intended position, which then has a rather negative effect on the general look. It's really only intended to bring the different body parts and components in the right position for Atlur Kabuterimon's form, and therefore only for the transformation. So it's rather better to not move it, and let's say the head is not articulated. Only the lower jaw is hinged like on the old one. The joint structure of the upper arm pair is identical in base to that of Tentomon's forelimbs. They are same connected to the body with such a hinge ball pack, which means that the entire structure can be moved up and down, but what it is similar to Tentomon, so it looks only in that upward pushed position good for Atlur Kabuterimon's perfect look, especially for the accurate position of the muscle, and also in terms of the perfect closing up with the muscle to the upper body section, and you should therefore only let it in this one particular position. The upper arm pairs can be moved in all directions on this ball until parts getting in the way again. Then you have, let's say, for the biceps, a ball on which the lower part of the upper arm pair can be moved in all directions. Let's say on the elbow section we even have this great double hinge joint with which you can recreate super insect typical arm poses with the upper arm pair, which is just cool. And that even forwards and backwards, really a great design. The, let's say, pincer hands of the upper arm pair are then again on a ball, which also makes them movable in all directions, so the interaction of all these joints of the upper arm pair offers a big range of movements and the possibility for countless cool, unique poses. The joint structure of the lower arm pair, on the other hand, is a bit simpler, and you only have a molded on ball pack as a connection to the arm base, which allows the lower arm pair to move in all directions until parts getting in the way again. There is no ball for the biceps section here, the arm even not rotates, it has only a hinge joint below, as you can see. Instead of the second missing hinge joint, you have a ball for the lower arm pair on which you can move the foremost section of the arms in all directions, at least then due to the transformation. You can also rotate this double colored and detailed arm section as mentioned before. You also have no ball for the pincer hands of the lower arm pair, also due to the double detailed colored nature of it, due to the transformation. I can accept this for the pincer hand sections, but I find it a bit weak why you don't have a double hinge joint. Why you don't have a double hinge joint for the lower arm pair and just one hinge joint, and the upper part cannot even be rotated at the biceps. Because in my opinion it would not have affected it for Tentomon's form or the transformation, because this lower arm pair of Atlur Kabuterimon's form is, as I mentioned several times before, too big and too long for Tentomon's form's accurate representation of its middle limbs. So for this reason a few more joints on the lower arm pair would not have bothered, and they obviously wanted to save some money here, for which I unfortunately have to give a small point deduction despite this overall perfection. But it also could have been worse, because it is actually good. The joint structure of the legs is also similar to that of Tentomon's hind legs. In addition, we have the entire structure on a kind of seesaw hinge joint, on which you can swing the entire structure of the legs up and down, which, as you can see, also has the accurately molded features and matching colors to the rest of the front body details, on which the die-cast bars molded on, with which the legs are connected. The seesaw hinge joint itself is also made of die-cast. Like you can see the legs sitting again in such a half-cutted open ball joint that makes the legs movable in almost all directions, until parts getting in the way again. The upper part of the legs can be rotated 360 degrees on the connection on this half-cutted open ball joint. For the other joints of the legs I have to explain something beforehand. I adjusted the legs on the swivel joint actually incorrectly during my transformation, and so it looks a little different than it is actually intended to look in the lower section, and is therefore also turned round the wrong way. But you only can see this still in the images for the evolution scene, otherwise he was at a second photo shooting. I don't want to say that I did it on purpose now, and it's more because I didn't notice it how it is actually supposed to do, but let me explain it. It wasn't immediately apparent to me that I turned it the wrong way around, because somehow it worked for me better doing it this way in achieving a better closed look for the lower parts and the sections of the legs. In the opposite, you can see it now in this pictures how it is actually right and how it is intended to transform. Well, for the thigh section it looks better from the outside if the upper part is turned, as it is also intended to be, with the more open thigh section facing inwards to the thigh joint section, and the thigh section with the features facing outwards, so it also offers more range of movements. And I really hope you can understand what I mean. Furthermore, you pull the lower thinner section out of the knee section. This part then forms another lower leg part, as you can see, which I wrongly just regarded as a knee hinge joint in my version, and not directly as a part of the leg. Because on top of that it also looks very narrow to the upper and lower leg sections, and I hadn't pulled it out because of it looked odd to me this way. Correct, and as it is intended to be, is that this part forms a part of the lower leg with the slightly thicker lower part of the leg, which of course makes the legs a little longer than in my version, and I see that you can give Atlur Kabuterimon an even better characteristic leg position with the interaction of these many joints then it works in contrary with my false version. Visually, as it is actually intended, it does not look that great with the somewhat narrow middle part, I think, that you pull out, and you can also clearly see the many hinge joints from the front, which you can see in my version of course only from behind. If you turn the whole upper leg section the other way around, and in my version this more narrow middle part of the leg remains in the knee section. Because of the fact that everything seemed so strange to me with the extended narrow part and with the hinge joints in the front, so I thought to myself, no, it won't be never intended that way, it looks kind of weird. Because in my version everything seemed to me to be better completed and proportioned to each other, so of course I didn't waste any more thoughts about that. It could actually be different, because I thought it fits, looks good, under no circumstances pull this narrow part out, no, oh my, that doesn't look good. And yes, I want in no way to speak or justify nicely about the fact for not noticing that my version is actually wrong, because so I have it misinterpreted and therefore wrongly transformed it. Point finished. And I actually only noticed it because it looked kind of weird in the upper area, because the way it is intended to rotate it also looks better and gives a better view of these thigh sections from the sides, and was already a bit confused during the demonstration of the transformation and thought by myself, oh well, how was that intended to be? Because I had taken a closer look for these pictures, you also can actually see it clearly in the instructions as it is intended to be, even if it is more difficult to see because the pictures are not colorful, but that is also still no excuse for my failure. So sorry for this incompetence and that I didn't notice that it is actually intended differently. So much for that. And he actually gets a little bigger because the legs are longer in my version. He is only about 6 3/4 inches tall, which would be about 14 centimeters. And if you do everything as it was also intended to be, he is even better balanced by the other leg position. I just have to admit that, and slowly the other leg position, which you can give him as it is intended, just looks more and more natural and accurate to me as well. If you then transform it correctly as intended, then with this more narrow part you have a hinge joint for the knee section, another hinge joint for the lower leg section. For the foot structure in combination you have this hinge joint. It is also on each side on a ball peg as a foot joint, additionally for the feet, which you can move, turn and tilt on this ball in all directions, which in the interaction of all these joints also gives the legs an absolutely great posability. Furthermore, the outermost 2 front foot sections per foot are hinged, as well as the heel spike on the back section, but that's also all due to transformation, since these foot components should remain always more in the certain position. You can also perfectly adapt it to the front foot section, so to the surface, which is great, of course, but this generally applies to the heel spike, since this should already be pushed fully up for a more accurate look of the feet. And the posability of Atlur Kabuterimon is absolutely great in general, also in terms of and in contrast to the old figure. It is an improvement, even if the many joints just also be there due to the transforming ability, because here too most joints of the figure in both forms also serve as transformation joints at the same time. And the joints are very tight again and keep the adjusted poses very well, and this also applies to both Evo forms, although they are not as tight as some of the other figures in the series. To support the whole thing, however, the stand is also included in the package, which can be used for both forms to ensure the tightness of the joints for a longer time, as it was also highlighted in the text. Let's get to the diecast parts on Atlur Kabuterimon. According to Tamashii's text, the horn, parts of the chest, etc. should be made of diecast, but it was very unclear to what extent all of this will be, and I already said in the update that it was for Atlur Kabuterimon not obvious. He doesn't wear any direct armor, and because everything is more based on natural insects, so diecast is actually rather not matching for him, as I said in my update. Then I had said that the diecast would fit best for the entire head or helmet, because this could most likely be interpreted as a metal helmet because of Kabuterimon's helmet. In fact, on the figure is now the complete large horn, as well as the smaller horn, including the joint on which the smaller horn got molded on, are made of diecast. Furthermore, the entire front part of the upper body as well as the abdominal sections are die-casted, except for the transformation joint in the middle for the head and the skeleton looking like white part and the blue sting thing are made of plastic again. I think that almost everything on the front section is made from diecast is unsuitable, because these are all more natural looking body parts of Atlur Kabuterimon, which should not be feeling armored. But I can well imagine that it is also very good and positive to give the figure in the front section a little more weight to compensate the rather high weight of the carapace, so that the figure can be better balanced, because that's definitely very good. And I think that's rather the reason why they made this complete front part out of diecast, than less for the accurate representation and realistic feeling for the section. Furthermore, as I mentioned before, the 5 ball joints, including this complete seesaw joint, are made from diecast. You can see that very well on this prototype here. Before I finally starting with the box, as usual, let's turn back to the topic that they chosen the wrong way of evolution for this figure, and the what if question, if they had considered doing a remake of the old Kabuterimon Atlur Kabuterimon figure instead of Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon, which I will also connect with the conclusion then. Because this wrong way of evolution concept has been criticized quite often ahead for the further planned figures of the new series in general. So, what if? Well, I think it is more or less obvious when you look at the old figure and how it was designed at that time, that in the transformation system, and like the old figure was designed and implemented, they could not have changed much, or maybe even can't change or do anything differently for the new one. The figure would have as good as it would be possible with the new molds. Of course, this figure adds typical sharper molds, shapes and proportions in both forms due to the today's better technical possibilities. But on the whole, that would have been it, I think. Because even a remake of the old figure in a similar way could not have accomplished the change of body color and the change of the different typical body features and components for both forms much differently, and therefore it would not have looked different in its overall nature for both, like the old figure does look. In Atlur Kabuterimon's form, or as Mega Kabuterimon, the old figure still looks very good for a figure of that time, and Atlur Kabuterimon's form was able to hide almost all parts of Kabuterimon's form under the carapace and along the insides of the edges of it, in a nearly similar way as the new one is able to do it with Tentomon's parts. The carapace itself would have had to be designed the same way again to form it out of the folded together two wing pairs of Kabuterimon's form. The middle foot section of Kabuterimon's foot could have been more accurately designed as a double-sided fold-over part for both forms, so the foot problem could also have been solved for Atlur Kabuterimon's form. And therefore Atlur Kabuterimon's form could have looked just as good as the new Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon figure, even if he evolved from Kabuterimon's form like the old figure. But of course, with a few significantly drawbacks. Again, with a too short horn as a compromise if they had done it again like on the old figure. This also applies to the arm pairs and other components. The legs would have again those red covers, and so had to cover Kabuterimon's legs for the most part similar to as it is by the old figure. And so they would be again not the full legs for Atlur Kabuterimon's form again, would simply be the covered legs of Kabuterimon's form, which in the real sections would also have still the molded features and coloring of Kabuterimon's legs, just like on the old figure. But actually all of this in connection with the better possible made proportions of the different components, as it is the case with the actual new figure, because it goes the wrong way of evolution, brings the difference and helps making look this real new figure this good. Especially this applies for the accurate size of the horn. From this point of view, with the above mentioned drawbacks, the figure also would have looked in Atlur Kabuterimon's form never as good as it is case with the actual figure. I think with that leg covers, the range of movements for the lower part of the legs would also have been more limited by those covers, so they would not have had this accurate position and design and shape, because it would only be the covered legs of Kabuterimon on a remake of the old figure version. All of this becomes more and more obvious when you have both of them in front of you for comparison. The same applies to Kabuterimon's form, and he would have even more accurate looking Atlur Kabuterimon kibble hanging down on his back, similar like on the old one. And the figure would look exactly like the old figure in terms of the many large kibble parts on the back and the second head of Atlur Kabuterimon's form. And this huge second head really doesn't look good there between his two wing pairs. And without parts forming or without making parts removable, which is forbidden for transformable figures, Kabuterimon's form would be no different in his overall nature and rear view than the old figure is and looks like. And you couldn't have hidden such a huge second head inside a body as is the case with some other old figures who have heads for every form. The upper body would simply not be big enough for this, even if they had managed somehow to design the head foldable and compressible. You still would have the huge horn hanging down the back if they had it made in this accurate size and proportion to the head and rest of the body as it is on the actual new one, and if they not considered the compromise for Kabuterimon's form as in contrary they did for the old one. And whenever such a folded head in in unfolded form could have looked this accurately good sized and well proportioned to the rest remains an open question. If it would been possible at all how I described it, because in this rather flat body there would not be so much space inside. And then you would still have hanging down the upper arm pair with the big muscles of Atlur Kabuterimon's form on the back of Kabuterimon, like it is on the old one. The lower arm pair of Atlur Kabuterimon's form would have been designed similar to the old figure, with these blue arm covers for the color change for Kabuterimon, but in general the same would apply as I said about the legs covers for Atlur Kabuterimon's form. The hands of the lower arm pair could have been made a little more accurate with a trick in the transformation system for both forms, but Kabuterimon's back itself would have had these features, components and the coloring for Atlur Kabuterimon's form, as well as would be with the it would be with the two wing pairs seen from behind. In short, the figure in Kabuterimon's form would look in similar way and would be peppered with the kibble parts of Atlur Kabuterimon's form on its back, as you could see and derive from the old figure, and would only be a sharper molded remake with perhaps slightly improved proportions for one or the other components, but in general would in no way looking much better in both forms, as in contrary the actual figure does. And I think in the other case there would have been more criticism, because that would really have been a slightly better looking remake of the old figure. Though I personally had a critical view of the wrong way of evolution concept too, at first. And I would also have liked more a remake of the old figure just alone because for the correct evolution technical reasons. Because the concept of the old figure was just kind of cool, as I mentioned in my update video too. Because even with the best will in the world, I couldn't imagine that Tentomon's form would look so good, but I think that this perfect look of Tentomon's form just speaks for itself, and Tamashii has taught us otherwise. Since the first pictures of him had vanished my doubts immediately. Therefore, the last critic should also be convinced and realize that it was better for this transformable figure, and that in many ways, because of having gone this new concept of wrong way of evolution, simply paid off in full, because the figure in both forms looks from every angle just absolutely awesome and is almost kibble free all around, which for a transformable figure is just absolutely great and breathtaking. Of course, they take use of the advantage, but folks, honestly, that's okay if you get such a great final result for both forms, or not. Because Tentomon and Atlur Kabuterimon each have a huge advantage against the old Kabuterimon in the form of that insect carapace, under which they can simply hide the other evil form and its parts, which advantage was used by the Bandai Tamashii designers as simple as it was super ingenious. Because of the great looking end result in both Evo forms, I like absolutely and without any doubts and to 100% how this figure turned out. For me, it is the best figure of this figure series in many ways, which got released so far at that time. Therefore, especially this figure should not be missing in any collection, and I can only highly recommend it to you. Chou-Shinka-Tamashii Atlur Kabuterimon is simply super, ultra, mega, giga, awesome! And that in both evolution forms, and is another incredibly good, successful further masterpiece. with very few tiny weak points from the strict point of view of a critical collector, and due to Tamashii's own official statements that the figures should be perfect for such, I will therefore list these short. I already mentioned in detail that the lower arm pairs have less joints than the upper arm pair, and this I would count to this. As I also mentioned with the black dots, which are very loose and twist with the slightest touch, the same applies of these parts turned around for Atlur Kabuterimon's form, and there it is a little more worse and they twist even more easily. Would have been nice if they had designed these parts for both forms to snap into place. I would wished some joints for the pincer fingers, at least maybe for 2 pincer fingers per pincer hand. That would have been very cool for posing. Excuse me please. What also looks not so good is that they did not fill out a big horn on the rear side with plastic, but maybe it is because of the ability to transform and the lack of space inside for the parts. If they not done this for this reason, it would be of course okay and understandable. And the problem with the somewhat too round shaped carapace for Atlur Kabuterimon I already mentioned very detailed. What I also would count to this, though I also admitted already that it might not have been possible otherwise. But that is all still in the frame, in a good frame, and despite these tiny negative aspects, the figure just stays great, and this in both forms. What I also wanted to mention is something about a cool Evo background image, which I took for my own staged evolution scene and which you can still see in the background in the review images here. The same counts for Wargreimon's evolution backgrounds images, by the way. As you could see, this is the original final background image design from the Evo scenes of the 2 characters. I had already mentioned this in one of my update videos that Bandai Tamashii provided these wonderfully designed original background images as PDF download on their promotion page for the Digivolving-Spirits, so that you could download this PDF and print it out to be able to use them as background images with your figures, which I just thought that this is great and so awesome. Sadly, they did not do this for all figures and only for these 2, because this Wargreimon Complete Collector's Edition set included this Evo background image for Wargreimon in the package. I downloaded the PDFs, of course, let them print it out in a copy shop in a suitable size and shape, and used it for my Evo scene for Wargreimon and Atlur Kabuterimon, which idea I had from the beginning on, as I saw this PDF download special, but this only marginally. Let us now come to the box in order to be able to bring this assessment slowly to an end. Of course, the box of the 6th figure release is again a blind box and has again as cover the illustrations of the respective 2 characters by the Digimon designer Kenji Watanabe himself, very nicely illustrated. On this box you can see the cool illustrations by Kenji Watanabe of Tentomon and Atlur Kabuterimon. The box is again matte. This time this box is mainly matte red. Only the illustrations of Tentomon and Atlur Kabuterimon are printed glossy again. Apart from that, the diecast evolution logo, which is only highlighted here in that shiny chrome silver again, is again on the left. In the middle, as it was also on Alphamon's box, then you have the inscription for the title in glossy white on a matte grey background, Digivolving-Spirits, including a little larger in Japanese the Japanese name Chou-Shinka-Tamashii, and Digimon Adventure Tentomon Atlur Kabuterimon 06 for the 6th release. Below this, those very small Japanese writings again, which here for the first time it seems they translated into English additional, which is very nice that they done this. And as you can see, it says following: designed by Tamashii Nations in Japan. Additional below this, Bandai Spirits 2018, made in China to the right, illustrated by Kenji Watanabe. And on the right lower corner the Digimon Adventure logo, and below the Bandai and Tamashii Nations logos, whereby this time the Bandai logo has a special white and blue coloring. We also have on top of it such a dazzling hologram seal sticker from Tamashii Nation, which again shows the Tamashii Nations logo in the middle, and around you can read Tamashii Nations logo. Excuse me please, Tamashii Nations quality. The lid is, as you can see, only matte red and glossy white printed in the middle, or again in a similar form the designation Digivolving-Spirits, Chou-Shinka-Tamashii, Digimon Adventure 06, Tentomon, Atlur Kabuterimon, and left and right of it they printed in a kinda faded glossy red again the silhouettes of the figures of Tentomon and Atlur Kabuterimon. As you can see, the left side shows a product image of Tentomon's form, and above it the glossy white title again, surrounded by the 8 crest symbols of Adventure 01. On the right side we have a product image of Atlur Kabuterimon's form. Below again the same inscription in white glossy without the crest symbols. The matte back shows as usual the great promotion image from the side, with all kinds of inscriptions and explanations in Japanese, which I cannot read. The die-cast parts and the clear parts are advertised again. Again the designation on the top left, this time printed in glossy red. Digimon Adventure 06, Tentomon, Atlur Kabuterimon, on the right opposite again in matte red, Digivolving-Spirits, Chou-Shinka-Tamashii, and underneath the printed die-cast evolution logo. To the left of Atlur Kabuterimon again, as usual, the cutouts from the promotion text in Japanese and even in English. A few English warnings below on the left, and on the right opposite the promotion image for the next figure release, again glossy printed. Next lineup 07 Digimon Adventure Patamon Holy Angemon, with the corresponding wonderful promotion image for both. On the bottom the warnings and notes again in Japanese and partly with English notes that with the Bandai Spirits you can read often, and there is also the support address, so you check out yourself. What is this all about? On the right again the printed Toei seal and the glossy red title. The really interesting thing is hidden as usual on the lid flap. I had the following translated by my good female friend, again, who actually knows Japanese very well, so there is something different printed than usual, and they paid attention again and have a quote from the anime of Tentomon himself printed there, because this time it says, "It is time to digivolve, Kushiro." And Kushiro means of course Izzy for us, so Tentomon asks his partner to let him digivolve as we know it from the anime. Isn't this super? And so nostalgic. On the left side flap with Atlur Kabuterimon and the crest symbol of knowledge says again, as much as you should cut out the crest symbol because of this campaign where proof of purchase of the figure is required, and the cut out crest symbol is then the required proof of purchase. On the right side flap this time Tentomon asked us to fill out the survey, including the Tamashii web logo and the web address. And now I think everything has been said that came to my mind about this figure and what was to be said about it. At this point I would like to thank you for your attention again and saying goodbye. I'm looking forward to present you the 7th release of this figure series in the next video, and of course I will dedicate this video to Chou-Shinka-Tamashii-Series, 07 Patamon Holy Angemon, or Digivolving-Spirits-Series 07 Patamon Magna Angemon. If you like this video, please do not hesitate to hit the like button, and if you liked my channel, you can subscribe to it. It's free! Bye, and until the next review video, your Mega 88 1000.
守れ愛する人たくましい自分になれるさ